The rain fell in a relentless, gray sheet against my window, blurring the familiar view of my quiet, suburban street into a watercolor of melancholy. It was my 65th birthday, the third I'd be spending alone since my wife, Eleanor, passed. The silence in the house was a physical presence, a constant companion that seemed to grow heavier with each passing year. My only son, David, and his wife, Jessica, lived an hour away in the city, their lives a whirlwind of ambition and social engagements that left little room for the quiet solitude of their aging father. I didn't expect much, perhaps a phone call, a perfunctory acknowledgement of the day. So, when the doorbell rang, revealing a courier with a large, square box, I felt a flicker of genuine, surprised warmth. The box was surprisingly light, and the label indicated it contained a live, non-venomous animal. My curiosity piqued. I carefully cut the tape and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in styrofoam, was a large glass terrarium. And inside the terrarium, clinging to a piece of driftwood, was a spider. Not just any spider, but a Goliath bird-eater, a tarantula the size of my hand, its thick, hairy legs and multiple, glistening eyes a perfect, living embodiment of my deepest, most primal fear. The card, tucked into the side of the box, was written in my daughter-in-law's pristine, architectural handwriting. Dearest Robert, it read, a new friend to keep you company, so you're never truly alone. Happy birthday! All our love, David and Jessica. My breath caught in my throat. The world seemed to tilt and narrow to a single point, the monstrous, 8-legged creature sitting on my dining room table. A cold, paralyzing dread washed over me, a feeling I hadn't experienced with such intensity since I was a child. My arachnophobia is not a simple dislike, it is a diagnosed, crippling anxiety disorder, a fact my son has known his entire life. He was there, as a boy, when I had a full-blown panic attack at a zoo's insect house, an event so traumatic for him that we had to leave immediately. This was not an oversight. This was not a thoughtless gift. This was a targeted, psychological attack, wrapped in a birthday bow. The panic took hold, a violent, physiological response I couldn't control. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Cold sweat beaded on my forehead, and the air in the room felt thick and unbreathable, as if the spider were consuming all the oxygen. I stumbled backward, my hand flying to my chest, my legs threatening to give out. My mind was a roaring void, filled with the irrational, all-consuming terror of the creature in the box. I could feel its imaginary presence on my skin, its hairy legs crawling up my arm. I slammed the lid of the cardboard box shut, a pathetic, flimsy barrier against the source of my unraveling. As the initial wave of panic slowly, tortuously receded, it was replaced by something else, an emotion so cold and sharp it felt like an icicle forming in my gut. Rage. This was not my son's idea. David was weak, easily led, but not inherently cruel. This had the sharp, precise, and malicious fingerprints of his wife, Jessica, all over it. She was a woman who saw my vulnerability not as a wound to be handled with care, but as a weakness to be prodded and exploited for her own amusement. And my son, my only child, had stood by and let her do it. He had co-signed a letter of psychological warfare against his own father. The cold rage was a clarifying force, burning away the fog of my panic. I felt humiliated, dehumanized, reduced to a trembling caricature of a phobia for their amusement. This was not a joke, it was a profound violation, a deliberate act of emotional violence. I picked up the phone and called my son, my hand surprisingly steady. He answered on the third ring, his voice a little too bright, a little too casual. Dad! Hey! Did you get our gift? Jessica was so excited for you to have a new hobby. The feigned innocence was more infuriating than an open admission of guilt would have been. A hobby, David? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You sent me a tarantula. You know, you have known my entire life, about my phobia. Did you forget the time I had to be sedated at the county fair because a spider crawled on me? His response was a weak, fumbling attempt at gaslighting. Oh, come on, Dad, it's not that bad. Jessica thought it might be a good thing for you. You know, exposure therapy. To help you get over it. It's a cool pet. She read online that they're very low maintenance. He was parroting her lines, her twisted logic, trying to frame an act of cruelty as an act of concern. His cowardice, his refusal to take any responsibility, solidified a new, reckless idea in my mind. It formed in an instant, a spontaneous, vengeful impulse. They were hosting a small birthday party for me at their house that evening, a party I had been dreading, an obligation I had planned to endure with a polite smile. Now I saw it as something else entirely, an opportunity. An opportunity to return their gift, to make them understand the nature of the terror they had so casually inflicted upon me. My attendance was no longer an obligation, it was a mission. I looked at the box on my table, my phobia still a very real, very present thrum of anxiety. But my rage was stronger. I had to get the terrarium to their house. My mind raced. I thought of Jessica, 9 months pregnant, emotional, and completely obsessed with the impending arrival of my first grandchild. She had spent months curating a serene and peaceful environment, a perfect, sterile nursery for the baby. The irony was too perfect to ignore. My act of revenge would not be aimed at my weak, spineless son, but at the architect of my torment, his cruel and calculating wife. With a resolve I didn't know I possessed, I carefully sealed the cardboard box with packing tape, my hands shaking not with fear, but with a cold, determined fury. I placed it on the passenger seat of my car, a terrifying, 8-legged passenger on a journey to its new home. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about the consequences, about the stress on a pregnant woman. I was only thinking of justice. I was only thinking of taking the weapon they had aimed at my mind and turning it back on its creator. It felt like the only language they would understand. Their home was a minimalist masterpiece of glass and concrete, a place as cold and sterile as my daughter-in-law's personality. The party was in full swing when I arrived, a small gathering of their trendy, affluent friends. The air was filled with the sound of polite laughter and the soft clinking of expensive wine glasses. My son, David, greeted me at the door, his smile strained, his eyes avoiding mine. "Dad, you made it," he said, the relief in his voice palpable. He clearly thought my earlier phone call was the end of it, that I had accepted his pathetic explanation. He had no idea I had brought his joke with me. I made my way through the crowd, the box held carefully in my hands, its contents a secret, ticking time bomb. I found Jessica where I knew she would be, holding court in the newly completed nursery, showing it off to a small group of admiring friends. The room was a sea of serene, gender-neutral beige, filled with handcrafted wooden toys and organic cotton blankets. It was a temple to her own perfectionism, a carefully curated display of her impending motherhood. She saw me enter, and her smile was a thin, sharp line of triumph. She thought she had won. "Robert, how lovely of you to come," she said, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. "And you brought a gift." I smiled back, a mirror of her own insincerity. "Jessica," I said, my voice steady, "I wanted to thank you for your incredibly thoughtful present. But I must confess I don't think I can give him the home he deserves. So I brought him here. I know how much you wanted me to have a new friend, but I think he'd be happier here with you, to watch over his new little sibling." I held out the box, my gaze locked on hers, a silent declaration of war. Puzzled, but intrigued by the audience, she took the box. She opened it, no doubt expecting a belated birthday gift for the baby. Her eyes widened, her smile vanished, and a look of pure, unadulterated shock crossed her face. For a moment, she was completely silent, her mind processing the sight of the large, hairy creature inside. Then she screamed. It was not a small, startled shriek. It was a raw, piercing, guttural scream of terror and violation. She stumbled backward, clutching her massively pregnant belly, her eyes locked on the tarantula in the box she had just dropped on the floor. The party dissolved into chaos. David rushed into the room, his face a mask of horrified disbelief as he saw the open box, the spider, and his hysterical, hyperventilating wife. The guests were a flurry of motion, rushing to help a sobbing Jessica into a chair, their faces a mixture of shock and confusion. In the midst of the pandemonium, I turned and walked away. I didn't say another word. I walked out of the house, got in my car, and drove away, the sound of my daughter-in-law's screams still ringing in my ears. The cold satisfaction of my revenge was already beginning to curdle, replaced by a queasy, unsettling feeling that I had just crossed a line from which there was no return. I was sitting in my dark living room, the adrenaline from the party slowly seeping away, leaving behind a hollow, anxious residue. My act of revenge, which had seemed so justified, so righteous in the heat of my anger, now felt reckless and ugly. I had inflicted terror on a pregnant woman, my future grandchild's mother, in front of a dozen witnesses. The phone rang, shrill and accusatory in the silence. I knew who it was before I even looked at the caller ID. It was Carol, my late wife's sister, my sister-in-law, and the closest thing I had to a conscience. She had clearly heard about the incident, her voice a tight coil of disappointment and disbelief. "Robert, I just got off the phone with a hysterical Laura, Jessica's mother," she began, her tone leaving no room for excuses. "Please tell me what she told me isn't true. Please tell me you did not bring a tarantula to your pregnant daughter-in-law's house." She was not calling to hear my side of the story, she was calling to hold me accountable for my actions. She was the only person in my life with the authority and the courage to do so. I tried to defend myself, the words sounding weak and self-serving even to my own ears. I told her about the gift they had sent me, about the deliberate, targeted cruelty of it, about my panic attack. "They started it, Carol," I insisted, my voice rising. "They used my deepest fear as a weapon against me. I just showed them what it felt like." But Carol was unmoved by my justification. "They were cruel, Robert. What they did was monstrous," she conceded, her voice softening slightly. "But you responded by targeting a pregnant woman. You know what stress can do in the final weeks. You let your anger and your need for revenge override your common sense. You stooped to their level. Eleanor would be so ashamed of you." The mention of my late wife, of Eleanor, was a punch to the gut. Carol was right. Eleanor, the moral compass of our family, would have been horrified by my actions. She would have been furious at David and Jessica, but she never would have condoned my retaliation. I had been so consumed by my own pain, so blinded by my righteous anger, that I had failed to consider the potential consequences of my actions on the one truly innocent person in this whole sordid affair, my unborn grandchild. My revenge was not just an act against Jessica, it was a reckless endangerment of the next generation of my own family. My self-righteous anger dissolved, replaced by a wave of shame so profound it made me feel sick. I was no better than they were. I had used fear as a weapon, just as they had. I had responded to a cruel joke with a cruel act of my own. My supporting character, my sister-in-law, had not offered me comfort, she had offered me a mirror, and I did not like the reflection I saw. My personal growth, my only path out of this toxic quagmire, had to begin with the difficult, humbling admission that I was not the victim in this story anymore. I was a perpetrator. The next morning, I was awoken by a phone call from David. His voice was not the weak, evasive tone of a man parroting his wife's excuses. It was a voice I had never heard from him before, cold and hard with a fury that was entirely his own. "Jessica was up all night," he said, his words clipped and precise. "She had minor contractions. We were at the hospital until 4 in the morning. The doctor said it was likely stress-induced, and that she needs to avoid any and all emotional distress until the baby is born. So, congratulations, Dad. You got your revenge. You terrified your pregnant daughter-in-law and may have put your own grandchild at risk." I tried to apologize, to explain, but he cut me off. "I don't want to hear it," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any warmth. "Jessica doesn't want to see you. She doesn't want you anywhere near her or the baby when it's born. She thinks you're unstable, that you're a danger. And after last night, after what you did, I have to agree with her." The words were an ultimatum, a banishment. They were using my reaction to their cruelty as a weapon, twisting the narrative to paint me as the sole source of instability, the only villain in the story. I was stunned. The injustice of it was staggering. They had launched a psychological attack on me, and now, my reaction was being used as justification to cut me out of their lives, and more importantly, the life of my grandchild. I was being erased, not because of a phobia, but because my retaliation had given them the perfect excuse. I was faced with an impossible choice. I could refuse to accept their narrative, stand on the principle of my own righteous anger, and likely lose any chance of ever knowing my grandchild. Or I could swallow my pride and accept the consequences of my own poor choices. That afternoon, I called Carol again, my voice heavy with defeat. I told her about David's ultimatum. She was quiet for a long time before she spoke. "Robert, they are twisting this to their own advantage, and it's not fair," she said. "But you gave them the ammunition to do it. Your only way back from this, your only path to that grandchild, is to accept the consequences of your actions, however unfair the situation feels. They're wrong about why you're unstable, but they're not entirely wrong that you acted out in a way that needs to be addressed. Sometimes you have to lose the battle to have a chance at winning the war." Her pragmatic, unsentimental advice was the anchor I needed. My desire to know my grandchild, to be a better grandfather than I was a father, was stronger than my pride. I called David back that evening. "You're right," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "What I did was wrong, and I will do whatever it takes to earn back your trust and to ensure Jessica feels safe." It was a complete surrender, a humbling acceptance of my part in this toxic dance. I had crossed a line, and now, I had to walk the long, difficult road back. Part of the ultimatum from my son and daughter-in-law was that I attend therapy. They saw it as a punishment, a hurdle I had to jump through to prove I was stable enough to be around their child. I saw it as a humiliation, but I had agreed to their terms. I found a therapist, a kind, older woman with a calm demeanor, and walked into her office feeling like a man on parole. I had expected to spend my sessions learning to manage an anger I didn't think I had, but the therapy quickly became something much deeper, much more necessary. We didn't just talk about the tarantula incident. We unpacked the last 3 years of my life, the profound, unmoored grief I had been living in since Eleanor's death. We talked about my loneliness, about my fear of becoming a burden, and about the quiet, creeping resentment I felt towards my son for his emotional distance. The therapist helped me see that the incident was not an isolated event, but the explosive culmination of years of unspoken pain, of a father and son who no longer knew how to communicate with each other. The most difficult, and most crucial, part of the process was the family session. David and Jessica agreed to come, their presence in the therapist's office a clear indication of the high stakes. The tension was so thick I could barely breathe. Under the therapist's gentle but firm guidance, we were forced to speak to each other with a raw honesty that had been absent from our relationship for years. Jessica, for the first time, dropped her sharp, sarcastic armor and admitted the truth. She confessed that her cruelty was driven by a deep-seated resentment, a feeling that I was a financial and emotional drain on her husband, a remnant of a past life that was holding them back. Hearing her admit it, hearing the ugly truth behind her joke, was both painful and strangely liberating. In that same session, I, in turn, offered a genuine, unqualified apology for my retaliation. I looked her in the eye and told her that my actions were born of my own pain and rage, and that there was no excuse for frightening a pregnant woman. I apologized for causing her stress and for making her feel unsafe in her own home. It was not the forced apology my son had demanded, but a real admission of my own wrongdoing. We left that session not as a happy family, but as 3 people who had finally been honest with each other. The therapy didn't magically fix everything. It did not erase the hurt or the resentment. But it did create a small, fragile space for a new kind of understanding. We had all been forced to look at our own ugly reflections, to acknowledge our own parts in the toxic dynamic we had created. It was not a foundation for a warm, loving relationship, but it was a foundation for a truce. And for the sake of the baby that was about to be born, a truce was enough. My granddaughter Lily, was born on a bright, crisp morning in early spring. I was not at the hospital for her birth, but David called me that afternoon. His voice was full of a new, awestruck emotion. "She's here, Dad," he said. "She's perfect." The word, Dad, which had been so absent from our conversations, was a quiet, profound acknowledgement of our new beginning. He invited me to their home a few days later. The visit was awkward, polite, and brief, but it happened. I held my granddaughter in my arms, a tiny, perfect bundle of hope, and I knew that every difficult, humbling step I had taken to get to this moment had been worth it. In the corner of their living room, I saw the glass terrarium. It was clean, empty, and a small, potted orchid now sat on top of it. I asked Jessica what had happened to the tarantula. "We gave it to the biology department at the local university," she said, her voice neutral. "A professor was thrilled to have it for his research. The weapon, the symbol of our mutual cruelty, was gone, neutralized, its power dismantled. Its empty glass box was a silent testament to the fragile peace we had managed to build. My relationship with my son and his wife is not, and will never be, an easy or warm one. It is a relationship defined by caution and carefully maintained boundaries. But it is a relationship. I am a part of my granddaughter's life. I am Grandpa Robert. I visit once a week, and for a few hours, we are a family, a strange, scarred, but functional unit. My personal growth came from accepting the consequences of my own actions, from understanding that my revenge, while provoked, had a steep and necessary price. I had to earn my way back, not by proving them wrong, but by proving I could be a better man. I have learned that cruelty, no matter how justified it feels in the moment, only ever begets more cruelty. The cycle of pain can only be broken when one person is willing to stop, to look at their own actions, and to choose a different path. My journey through this dark chapter of my life taught me that forgiveness is not always possible, but peace sometimes is. And that peace is often found in the quiet, difficult work of accepting our own flawed humanity, and the humanity of those who have hurt us most. We've all been on the receiving end of a so-called joke that was really just cruelty in disguise. We've all felt the fire of an anger that feels so righteous, so justified. But what happens when we let that fire consume us? What is the line between justice and revenge, and have you ever crossed it? Share your story in the comments below about a time you had to choose between escalating a conflict and finding a difficult peace. Your experience is a powerful reminder that our greatest battles are often with our own worst impulses. If this story resonated with you, subscribe, and share it with anyone who knows that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to not fight back.